The first tremor is not felt by flesh, but by stone. Deep beneath the ashen crust of a forgotten world, where the sun's light has not touched for 10 million years, something stirs. It is not the slow, patient shifting of tectonic plates, nor the hungry burrowing of Xenos vermin. It is a pulse, cold and mathematical, echoing through obsidian vaults and labyrinthine corridors lined with the bones of a civilization that once ruled the stars. In the silence, a single mote of dust drifts, disturbed by a breath that is not a breath, a movement that is not life as mortals know it. The air, stale and ancient, vibrates with a frequency older than memory. Somewhere, a sarcophagus splits open with a sound like the cracking of a world's heart. Eyes flicker to life, emerald, pitiless, unblinking. The Necrons are awakening, and the galaxy, in all its ignorance and arrogance, will soon remember why it once trembled at the mention of their name. The world was called Dagon's Rest, though no one remembered who Dagon was or why he had ever chosen to rest here. The name lingered like a curse, spoken in hushed tones by the few who still dared to call this place home. The sky above was a perpetual bruise, a sullen violet streaked with the sickly yellow of chemical storms. The wind carried the taste of rust and old blood, and the air was thick with the memory of things better left unspoken. On the surface, the ruins of a once thriving manufacturing city sprawled across the horizon, its towers broken and leaning, its streets choked with the detritus of forgotten wars. The only movement came from the wind, and from the desperate, furtive scurrying of those who had not yet given up hope. In the shadow of a collapsed hab block, a child named Lyra crouched, her breath shallow and ragged. She pressed her back against the cold ferrocrete, feeling the vibration of distant thunder through her bones. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, searched the gloom for any sign of movement. She had learned to trust her senses, to listen for the subtle changes in the world around her, the way the wind shifted, the way the dust settled, the way the silence deepened. On Dagon's Rest, silence was never a comfort. It was a warning, a prelude to something worse. Lyra's mother had told her stories of the world before, when the manufactorum still belched smoke and the sky was alive with the roar engines. She spoke of markets filled with laughter, of banners bearing the Imperial Aquila fluttering in the breeze, of soldiers in shining armor marching in perfect formation. But those memories were as distant as the stars, and Lyra had never seen them with her own eyes. All she knew was hunger and fear and the endless suffocating quiet. The others in the enclave moved like ghosts, their faces gaunt and hollow-eyed. They spoke little, conserving their strength for the daily struggle to find food and clean water. Every morning, a few brave souls ventured out into the ruins, searching for anything that might keep them alive another day. A can of corpse starch, a half-empty water flask, a battered las pistol with a single charge left. Most returned empty-handed. Some did not return at all. The enclave's leader, a grizzled former guardsman named Sergeant Voss, kept watch from a makeshift tower built atop the ruins of an old Vox relay. His eyes were sharp, his hands steady, but even he could not banish the sense of dread that hung over the settlement. He had seen too much, survived too many horrors to believe in miracles. He trusted only in discipline, in routine, in the cold comfort of his battered lasgun. On this day, as the sun struggled to pierce the toxic haze, Voss scanned the horizon with a pair of cracked magnoculars. He saw nothing but ruin and dust, the world as it had always been. Yet something gnawed at him, a feeling he could not name. The silence was deeper than usual, heavier, as if the world itself were holding its breath. He shifted his weight, the servos in his old flak armor whining in protest, and tried to shake off the unease. Below, in the shadowed corridors of the enclave, Lyra's mother, Mara, tended to the wounded. There were always wounded, scrapes and burns, broken bones, the slow rot of infection. She worked with what little she had, a few vials of synth salve, a handful of bandages, a prayer to the Emperor whispered over each patient. Her hands were steady, her voice calm, but her eyes betrayed her fear. She had seen the signs, strange lights flickering in the ruins at night, the sudden disappearance of scavenger teams, the way the ground sometimes trembled beneath her feet. She told herself it was nothing, just the world settling, just the ghosts of the past stirring in their sleep, but she did not believe it. In the manufacturum's shadow, the Enclave's children played a silent game, their laughter swallowed by the wind. They darted between piles of rubble, their movements quick and furtive, always glancing over their shoulders. They had learned to be quiet, to hide at the first sign of danger. Their innocence had been stripped away, replaced with a wary cunning that belied their years. As the day wore on, the sky darkened and the wind grew colder. The Enclave huddled together in their makeshift shelters, sharing what little warmth they could find. The silence pressed in on them, heavy and suffocating. Somewhere in the distance, a low rumble echoed through the ruins, too deep to be thunder, too steady for the wind. The ground shivered, and for a moment, everyone froze. Voss felt it first, a subtle vibration, barely perceptible, but unmistakable. He tensed, his hand tightening on the grip of his lasgun. He scanned the horizon again, searching for any sign of movement. The ruins were still, the shadows deep and impenetrable. Yet the feeling persisted, a sense of something vast and ancient stirring beneath his feet. He shifted his weight, the servos in his old flak armor whining in protest, and tried to shake off the unease. Below, in the shadowed corridors of the Enclave, Lyra's mother, Mara, tended to the wounded. There were always wounded, scrapes and burns, broken bones, the slow rot of infection. She worked with what little she had, a few vials of synth salve, a handful of bandages, a prayer to the Emperor whispered over each patient. Her hands were steady, her voice calm, but her eyes betrayed her fear. She had seen the signs, strange lights flickering in the ruins at night, the sudden disappearance of scavenger teams, the way the ground sometimes trembled beneath her feet. She told herself it was nothing, just the world settling, just the ghosts of the past stirring in their sleep, but she did not believe it. In the manufacturum's shadow, the Enclave's children played a silent game, their laughter swallowed by the wind. They darted between piles of rubble, their movements quick and furtive, always glancing over their shoulders. They had learned to be quiet, to hide at the first sign of danger. Their innocence had been stripped away, replaced with a wary cunning that belied their years. As the day wore on, the sky darkened and the wind grew colder. The Enclave huddled together in their makeshift shelters, sharing what little warmth they could find. The silence pressed in on them, heavy and suffocating. Somewhere in the distance, a low rumble echoed through the ruins, too deep to be thunder, too steady for the wind. The ground shivered, and for a moment, everyone froze. Voss felt it first, a subtle vibration, barely perceptible, but unmistakable. He tensed, his hand tightening on the grip of his lasgun. He scanned the horizon again, searching for any sign of movement. The ruins were still, the shadows deep and impenetrable. Yet the feeling persisted, a sense of something vast and ancient stirring beneath his feet. He shifted his weight, the servos in his old flak armor whining in protest, and tried to shake off the unease. Below, in the shadowed corridors of the Enclave, Lyra's mother, Mara, tended to the wounded. There were always wounded, scrapes and burns, broken bones, the slow rot of infection. She worked with what little she had, a few vials of synth salve, a handful of bandages, a prayer to the Emperor whispered over each patient. Her hands were steady, her voice calm, but her eyes betrayed her fear. She had seen the signs, strange lights flickering in the ruins at night, the sudden disappearance of scavenger teams, the way the ground sometimes trembled beneath her feet. She told herself it was nothing, just the world settling, just the ghosts of the past stirring in their sleep. But she did not believe it. In the manufacturum's shadow, the Enclave's children played a silent game, their laughter swallowed by the wind. They darted between piles of rubble, their movements quick and furtive, always glancing over their shoulders. They had learned to be quiet, to hide at the first sign of danger. Their innocence had been stripped away, replaced with a wary cunning that belied their years. As the day wore on, the sky darkened and the wind grew colder. The Enclave huddled together in their makeshift.
Mara pulled her daughter behind a collapsed wall, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She pressed Lyra's face to her chest, whispering prayers to the Emperor, to the saints, to any power that might hear her in this forsaken place. The words tasted of desperation, brittle and hollow, but she clung to them all the same. Around them, the world dissolved into chaos. The screams of the dying mingled with the mechanical whine of Necron weapons, the ground shaking with the relentless march of metal feet. Somewhere, Voss rallied a handful of survivors, their lasguns spitting defiance at the advancing enemy. The beams left blackened scars on the Necron's armor, but the machines did not slow, did not falter. They advanced with the patience of eternity, each step measured, each movement precise. In the tomb below, the awakening spread. More sarcophagi opened, more warriors joined the ranks. The Necron Lord moved through the halls of his domain, his mind linked to every construct, every weapon, every trap. He saw the world above through 1,000 eyes, felt the pulse of energy as his legions reclaimed the surface. He remembered the long sleep, the endless darkness, the promise of vengeance. The protocols were clear. Cleanse the world, prepare it for the return of the dynasty. The living were an infestation, a blight to be erased. He issued new commands, his will rippling through the tomb like a shockwave. The warriors responded instantly, their movements synchronizing, their fire converging on pockets of resistance. On the surface, the Enclave's last defenders made their stand. Voss crouched behind a shattered column, his lasgun hot in his hands, his breath coming in ragged bursts. He watched as a Necron strode into the open, its Gauss flare raised, its eyes fixed on him. He fired, the beam striking the machine's chest, leaving a smoking crater. The Necron staggered, but did not fall. It turned its weapon on him, and Voss saw his death reflected in those pitiless green eyes. He did not flinch. He squeezed the trigger again, and again, until the charge pack whined empty. The Necron advanced, implacable, its weapon humming with lethal promise. Voss braced himself, whispering a final prayer, when suddenly the ground beneath the Necron erupted. A section of the manufactorum floor collapsed, swallowing the machine in a cloud of dust and debris. For a moment, hope flickered in Voss's heart. He shouted for the others to fall back, to regroup, to find shelter. The survivors scrambled through the ruins, their movements frantic, their hope as fragile as glass. Lyra and Mara moved with the crowd, their bodies pressed close, their minds numbed with shock. They stumbled through corridors choked with rubble, past the bodies of friends and neighbors, past the smoldering remains of what they had once been their home. The world that they had known was gone, erased in a single night by an enemy older than memory. The Necrons pressed their attack, their weapons cutting down the fleeing survivors with merciless efficiency. There was no malice in their actions, no joy in the slaughter, only the cold fulfillment of ancient orders, the inexorable advance of a will that could not be denied. In the depths of the tomb, the Necron Lord paused before a great door, its surface inscribed with glyphs of power and warning. He placed his hand upon the cold metal, and the door slid open with a sound like the grinding of worlds. Beyond lay the heart of the tomb, the command nexus from which the fate of the world would be decided. He entered, his mind expanding to encompass the full scope of his domain. He saw the surface, the ruins, the fleeing mortals. He saw the stars above, distant and cold. He remembered the promise of the silent king, the dream of a galaxy restored to order. He felt the weight of destiny settle upon his shoulders, and he welcomed it. The awakening was complete. The reclamation had begun. The world above the tomb had become a labyrinth of fear. The air was thick with the scent of scorched flesh and the metallic tang of vaporized stone, every breath a reminder of the massacre that had swept through the enclave. The ruins, once a place of desperate hope and fragile community, were now a hunting ground. The Necrons moved through the shattered manufactorum with the patience of inevitability, their emerald eyes cutting through the darkness, their weapons humming with the promise of oblivion. For those who survived the first onslaught, every moment was a battle against despair. Lyra ran, her small hand locked in her mother's grip, her legs burning with exhaustion. The world had shrunk to a series of hiding places and blind corners, each one a potential grave. The screams had faded, replaced by the low, mechanical drone of Necron patrols sweeping the ruins. Mara's breath came in ragged bursts, her mind racing with memories of old training, half-remembered lessons from a time before motherhood and hunger. She pressed Lyra's face to the cold stone, her body shielding her daughter from sight, her ears straining for the telltale whine of Gauss fire. The silence was a living thing, pressing in on them, broken only by the distant, echoing footsteps of the enemy. Elsewhere, Voss led a handful of survivors through the maze of collapsed corridors and shattered walls. His face was streaked with blood and dust, his eyes hollow with fatigue. He moved with the grim determination of a man who had nothing left to lose, every step calculated, every breath a silent prayer. The group followed him without question, their trust born of desperation. They carried what weapons they could salvage: lasguns with dying charge packs, a battered autogun, a single grenade that Voss guarded like a relic. They knew it would not be enough, but hope was a stubborn thing, and it clung to them even as the world crumbled. The Necrons hunted without haste, their movements precise and unhurried. They swept through the ruins in silent phalanxes, their Gauss flares ready, their sensors attuned to the faintest trace of life. Where they found the living, they acted without hesitation, their weapons cutting down the survivors with merciless efficiency. There was no malice in their actions, no joy in the slaughter, only the cold fulfillment of ancient orders, the inexorable advance of a will that could not be denied. Lyra and Mara crept through the shadows, their bodies pressed close, their hearts pounding in unison. They moved from cover to cover, guided by instinct and desperation. At times, they glimpsed the Necrons moving through the ruins, their forms wreathed in green light, their eyes burning with ancient malice. Mara held her breath, her hand clamped over Lyra's mouth, her mind racing with plans and prayers. She remembered the stories her father had told her, stories of heroes who had faced the darkness and survived. She clung to those stories now, drawing strength from the memory of hope. Voss and his group found shelter in the ruins of an old chapel, its walls scorched and broken, its altar defaced by time and neglect. They huddled together in the shadows, their bodies pressed close for warmth, their eyes fixed on the shattered door. Voss checked his lasgun, his hand steady despite the tremor in his heart. He looked at the faces around him, men and women who had lost everything, who had nothing left but the will to survive. He spoke in a low voice, his words measured and calm. He told them to stay quiet, to conserve their strength, to trust in the Emperor's protection. The others nodded, their faces drawn and weary. They had heard it all before, but there was comfort in the ritual, in the familiar cadence of his voice. Outside, the Necrons moved with relentless purpose. They swept the ruins with methodical precision, their sensors attuned to the faintest trace of life. Where they found the bodies of the dead, their forms reduced to ash and bone and passed over them without a second glance. They found the hiding places of the living and dealt with them in silence. There was no malice in their actions, no joy in the slaughter, only the cold fulfillment of ancient orders, the inexorable advance of a will that could not be denied. Lyra and Mara found themselves trapped in a dead-end corridor, the walls closing in around them, the air thick with dust and fear. Mara pressed her daughter against the wall, her body tense, her mind racing. She heard the sound of metal feet on stone, the low hum of a Gauss flare charging. She closed her eyes, whispering a prayer to the Emperor, to the saints, to any power that might hear her in this forsaken place. The words tasted of desperation, brittle and hollow, but she clung to them all the same. The footsteps drew closer, the light grew brighter, and Mara braced herself for the end. But the Necron passed by, its eyes fixed on some distant point, its mind occupied with calculations beyond human understanding. Mara let out a shuddering breath, her body sagging with relief. She pulled Lyra close, her hands shaking, her heart pounding. They waited in the darkness, listening to the silence, their hope as fragile as glass. Voss and his group prepared for a last stand. They barricaded the chapel door with broken pews and shattered stone, their weapons ready, their eyes fixed on the shadows. Voss knelt before the ruined altar, his head bowed, his hands clasped in prayer. He asked for strength, for courage, for a miracle. He knew it would not come, but the ritual gave him comfort, a sense of purpose in a world gone mad. The others joined him, their voices rising in a low, desperate chant. The sound echoed through the ruins, a defiant challenge to the darkness. The Necrons heard the sound, their sensors registering the anomaly. They turned as one, their movements synchronized, their weapons raised.
Lyra tugged at her sleeve, her voice a whisper. "Mama, what is that?" Mara followed her gaze and saw, half buried in the debris, a flicker of green light. For a moment, her heart froze, fear surging through her veins. But as she drew closer, she saw that it was not a Necron, but a fragment of ancient technology, a power cell, still glowing after all these years. She knelt, examining it, her mind racing. If she could coax a spark from it, perhaps she could power a door, a lift, some forgotten machine that might offer them a way out. It was a slim hope, but hope was all they had. She worked quickly, her hands steady, despite the tremor in her heart. Lyra watched in silence, her eyes wide with fear and wonder. The chamber seemed to hold its breath, the silence pressing in on them, broken only by the faint hum of the power cell as Mara coaxed it to life. A panel flickered, a machine somewhere deep in the walls shuddered, and a door slid open with a groan of ancient servos. Beyond lay another tunnel, its darkness promising both danger and escape. Mara gathered Lyra close, her voice steady. "We have to keep moving," she said, and together they slipped through the door, leaving the chamber behind. The tunnel beyond was colder, the air sharp with the scent of ozone and old secrets. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the silence, their hope a fragile flame in the darkness. Mara and Lyra pressed deeper into the tomb, the air growing colder, the silence more profound. They passed through chambers filled with the relics of a civilization that had once ruled the galaxy. Statues of kings and warriors, their faces worn smooth by the passage of millennia. Murals that depicted battles fought on worlds now lost to memory. Machines whose purpose was long forgotten, their lights flickering with the last vestiges of power. Lyra paused before one of the statues, her hand reaching out to trace the lines of its face. For a moment she felt a connection, a sense of recognition that made her shiver. She pulled her hand back, her eyes wide with fear and wonder. Mara watched her daughter, her heart aching with a mixture of pride and terror. She saw the way Lyra moved, the way she seemed to sense the presence of the Necrons even before they appeared. She wondered if the tomb was changing her, if the echoes of eternity were rewriting her soul. She wanted to believe that they could escape, that they could find a way back to the world of light and air. But the deeper they went, the more she felt the weight of history pressing down on them, the sense that they were walking through the dreams of the dead. In the heart of the tomb, the Necron Lord paused before a great mural, its surface etched with the story of his people. He traced the lines with a finger of living metal, his mind filled with memories that were not his own. He saw the rise of the Necron tier, their war against the old ones, the bargain with the Citan, the curse of immortality. He saw the long sleep, the promise of awakening, the hope that one day his people would reclaim their place among the stars. But as he looked upon the mural, he felt a flicker of doubt, a question that had no answer. Was this destiny, or was it a prison? Was he a king, or merely a warden of the dead? The echoes of eternity reverberated through the tomb, touching every mind, living and dead. Mara felt it in the way her thoughts drifted, in the way her memories seemed to blur at the edges. Lyra felt it in the dreams that haunted her sleep, in the visions that bled into waking life. The Necron Lord felt it in the memories that lingered, in the questions that would not die. The world itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next note in a requiem that had begun before time itself. And somewhere in the darkness, a new sound began to rise, a low, mournful hum, the voice of the tomb itself, singing the song of eternity. It was a sound that spoke of loss and longing, of hope and despair, of the endless cycle of life and death. It was a sound that would echo through the stars, a warning to all who would dare to dream of immortality.